What you're about to see is one of the most explosive showdowns ever to unfold in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom. An incident so shocking, it rewrote the political landscape of an entire city. When the mayor's wife strutted in with entitlement dripping from every step, she believed her husband's office made her untouchable. But the moment she opened her mouth and threatened a sitting judge, she triggered a chain reaction that would obliterate her arrogance and her husband's political career and expose one of the most unforgettable corruption scandals Providence has ever seen. This is what happens when political privilege collides head-on with judicial authority, when someone confuses their spouse's election victory with absolute power, and when a mayor's wife discovers that threatening a judge is the quickest way to burn down everything her family built in politics. But before we dive into this unbelievable political meltdown that shook the city, hit that subscribe button to join Case Closed, where justice speaks louder than power. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? Your answers help this community grow, and they help stories like this reach viewers everywhere who need to understand one truth: no political title is above the law. It's a tense Wednesday morning in March, and Providence Municipal Court is handling its usual docket of traffic violations and municipal infractions. The early spring air carries a sense of renewal, but inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is about to become charged with political electricity. At exactly 10:30 a.m., the courtroom doors swing open with dramatic flair, and through them strides Victoria "Vicky" Romano, the 45-year-old wife of Providence Mayor Anthony Romano. Vicky moves with the kind of imperious confidence that comes from years of believing that her husband's political position grants her immunity from the rules that govern ordinary citizens. She's dressed in an expensive designer suit that probably costs more than most people's monthly salary. Her jewelry catches the courtroom lights with obvious intent, and her entire demeanor radiates the superiority complex that develops when someone has never been told no by anyone who matters. Vicky is here because 3 weeks ago she received a citation for parking in a fire lane outside the exclusive waterfront bistro during a political fundraiser. The violation occurred while she was attending a $1,000 per plate dinner for her husband's re-election campaign. The fine is standard $920 plus court costs, but Vicky isn't here to pay anything. She's here because she believes her status as the mayor's wife should exempt her from what she considers petty municipal enforcement that doesn't apply to political families. What Vicky doesn't realize is that she's about to challenge a judge who has been independent of political influence for 35 years and who has zero tolerance for politicians or their families who think elected office grants them special legal privileges. As Vicky approaches the defendant's stand, her body language immediately establishes a confrontational tone. She doesn't show any humility, keeps checking her expensive watch as if this proceeding is beneath her valuable time, and maintains the posture of someone who believes she's doing the court a favor by appearing at all. Victoria Romano, the court clerk, announces, reading from the docket. Vicky steps forward with obvious impatience, her political connections prominently displayed through her bearing, and her assumption that everyone in the courtroom knows exactly who she is and why she matters. Judge Caprio looks up from his paperwork with the experienced eye of someone who has dealt with every form of political arrogance imaginable, including politicians' spouses who confuse their marital status with legal immunity. Mrs. Romano, Judge Caprio begins, his voice carrying the measured authority of 35 years of judicial independence from political pressure. You're charged with parking in a designated fire lane in violation of City Ordinance 15-8. This violation occurred on March 2nd at 7:45 p.m. outside the waterfront bistro. How do you plead? Vicky's response immediately signals that this case will become a political showdown unlike anything the courtroom has seen before. Your Honor, Vicky says, her voice dripping with political condescension and barely concealed irritation. "I'm pleading not guilty because this citation represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the practical realities of municipal governance and the operational necessities of political leadership." Judge Caprio sets down his pen. Never a positive sign for defendants who think they can lecture him about municipal governance. "Mrs. Romano, were you attending a municipal function or conducting official city business at the time of the violation?" "Your Honor, I was attending a political fundraiser for my husband's re-election campaign. As the mayor's wife, my attendance at such events is essential for effective municipal leadership and community engagement." The courtroom becomes very quiet. Vicky has just claimed that her husband's political campaign activities should exempt her from fire safety regulations. "Mrs. Romano, do you hold any elected office or official position with the City of Providence?" Vicky's irritation becomes visible as she realizes she's being pressed for specifics about her actual authority. "Your Honor, as the mayor's wife, I serve in an unofficial but vital capacity supporting municipal governance and representing the city at important community events." Judge Caprio's expression doesn't change, but veteran court watchers recognize the signs of a judge who is about to deliver a civic education about the difference between political influence and legal authority. "Mrs. Romano, can you cite the specific municipal code or state statute that exempts mayor's spouses from fire safety regulations?" Vicky pauses, clearly not having expected to be challenged on legal specifics by a municipal court judge. "Your Honor, I think you're missing the larger picture of how municipal leadership actually functions in practice." The silence that follows is deafening. Vicky has just suggested that Judge Caprio doesn't understand how municipal government works. But Vicky isn't finished making the biggest mistake of her political life. "Your Honor," Vicky continues, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining obvious facts to someone who clearly doesn't get it. "I've been involved in Providence politics for 15 years as the mayor's wife. I think I understand how municipal authority and civic leadership work better than someone who sits in a courtroom all day dealing with minor infractions." The courtroom erupts in shocked murmurs. Vicky has just insulted Judge Caprio's understanding of municipal governance and suggested that political social status is superior to judicial authority. What happens next is even more explosive. Vicky looks directly at Judge Caprio with undisguised political arrogance. "Your Honor, I think you need to consider the practical implications of this situation. My husband is the mayor of this city. He appoints members to various municipal boards and commissions. The city's budget affects court funding. I suggest you think carefully about how you handle this case." Vicky has just threatened a sitting judge with political retaliation. She has crossed a line that will not only destroy her husband's career, but create the biggest political scandal in Providence history. What Judge Caprio does next will systematically demolish Vicky's political arrogance and potentially end Mayor Romano's political future forever. Judge Caprio slowly stands up from his bench, an unprecedented gesture that signals something monumental is about to happen. He removes his glasses with deliberate precision and looks directly at Vicky with the calm, measured expression of someone who is about to deliver the political education of a lifetime. "Mrs. Romano," Judge Caprio says, his voice remaining perfectly controlled but carrying the full weight of judicial independence, "did you just threaten this court with political retaliation?" Vicky, still emboldened by what she mistakes for judicial uncertainty, doubles down on her political intimidation attempt. "Your Honor, I'm simply pointing out the realities of how municipal governance operates. Political leaders have responsibilities and relationships that extend beyond individual court cases." Judge Caprio nods slowly, as if carefully documenting Vicky's threats for future reference. "I see. Mrs. Romano, since you've threatened this court with political retaliation and questioned my understanding of municipal authority, let me share some information with you about how our system of government actually works. The judge moves to his constitutional law books that had been sitting on his desk. Mrs. Romano, you mentioned that your husband appoints people to municipal boards. Are you familiar with the constitutional principle of separation of powers and judicial independence? Vicky hesitates, sensing she's walking into a constitutional ambush. Your Honor, I understand that political leadership requires cooperation between different branches of government. That's not what I asked, Mrs. Romano. Are you familiar with the constitutional requirement that the judicial branch remain independent from political pressure and intimidation? Vicky's confident demeanor begins to crack as she realizes she's being systematically outmatched by someone who understands constitutional law far better than she understands political influence. Your Honor, I never intended to threaten anyone. Mrs. Romano, Judge Caprio interrupts, his voice gaining constitutional authority. Threatening a judge with political retaliation is not just inappropriate, it's potentially criminal. It's called judicial intimidation, and it's a felony under Rhode Island state law. The arrogance starts draining from Vicky's face as she realizes she may have just committed a serious crime while being recorded in open court. Furthermore, Mrs. Romano, you suggested that I don't understand municipal governance. Let me share my qualifications with you. I've been practicing municipal law for 45 years. I've served on this bench for 35 years. I've worked with 12 different mayors, including your husband. I understand municipal authority better than politicians who think their spouse's election makes them experts on government. But Judge Caprio is just getting started. What he reveals next will completely destroy Vicky's case and expose the full scope of her political corruption. Judge Caprio pulls out a thick file from his desk. Mrs. Romano, since you've threatened this court and claimed political authority, I took the liberty of reviewing your parking and traffic violation history. Vicky's face goes completely pale. She clearly hadn't expected her driving record to be scrutinized. According to city records, you've received 11 parking violations in the past 2 years. How many of those tickets did you pay, Mrs. Romano? The courtroom is dead silent as Vicky realizes the scope of her legal and political miscalculation. Your Honor, I'm not sure of the exact number. I'll help you with the exact number. Mrs. Romano, you paid 0. According to these records, you've ignored 11 municipal citations, accumulating $2,200 in unpaid fines and penalties. Vicky tries to speak, but Judge Caprio continues with devastating precision. Furthermore, Mrs. Romano, city parking enforcement has documented 17 different occasions where you've used your political status to avoid citations, including twice where you told parking officers, and I quote, "Do you know who my husband is? This ticket will disappear." Vicky's political arrogance has completely evaporated, replaced by genuine terror as she realizes her pattern of corruption is being exposed in open court. Your Honor, those incidents were misunderstandings. Mrs. Romano, threatening parking officers with political retaliation isn't a misunderstanding. It's abuse of political power. And now you've threatened a sitting judge with the same corrupt tactics. Judge Caprio's voice grows stronger, more authoritative. You suggested that your husband's position as mayor gives you special privileges. You threatened this court with political consequences. You've demonstrated a pattern of using political intimidation to avoid legal accountability. What Judge Caprio announces next will shock everyone and create the biggest political scandal in Providence history. Mrs. Romano, not only am I finding you guilty of the fire lane violation and imposing the full $200 fine plus court costs, but I'm also holding you in contempt of court for threatening judicial independence. Vicky's mouth opens in shock. But Judge Caprio isn't finished. Furthermore, Mrs. Romano, I'm directing court administration to forward a complete transcript of today's proceedings to the Rhode Island Attorney General's office for investigation of judicial intimidation, political corruption, and abuse of public trust. The courtroom buzzes with shock as Vicky realizes the implications for her husband's political career. But most importantly, Judge Caprio continues, standing at his full judicial authority, I'm referring this matter to the Providence City Council Ethics Committee and recommending a full investigation into Mayor Romano's administration regarding the systematic abuse of political position by family members. Vicky looks like she's about to faint as the full weight of her political destruction becomes apparent. Your Honor, you can't destroy my husband's career because of a parking ticket. Mrs. Romano, I'm not destroying your husband's career. You destroyed your husband's career the moment you decided to threaten a sitting judge while demonstrating a pattern of political corruption that reflects directly on his administration. Judge Caprio walks closer to the defendant's stand, his full constitutional authority on display. Mrs. Romano, let me share something with you about political power and judicial independence. I've served under 12 mayors in my 35 years on this bench. I've seen political families come and go. I've watched politicians who thought they were untouchable learn that in this courtroom, the Constitution matters more than campaign contributions. The judge's voice takes on the tone of a civics professor addressing a failing student in corruption. Your husband holds office at the pleasure of the voters, not at the pleasure of this court. But when political families use intimidation, threats, and corruption to avoid legal accountability, they undermine the very democratic system that gave them power in the first place. Vicky stands frozen, her earlier political swagger completely destroyed. You walked into my courtroom today thinking you could threaten a judge with your husband's political position. Instead, you've demonstrated exactly why political corruption is dangerous to democracy and why judicial independence is essential to constitutional government. Judge Caprio returns to his bench, preparing to deliver his final political judgment. A mayor's wife who threatens judges is the same political family that threatens citizens. A politician whose spouse believes laws don't apply to them is a politician who believes democracy exists to serve their personal interests rather than the public good. The judge picks up his gavel. Mrs. Romano, your fine for the fire lane violation is $200. Your contempt of court citation carries an additional $500 penalty and 40 hours of community service. But most importantly, you'll be explaining to the Attorney General, the Ethics Committee, and the voters why a sitting judge found your conduct to be corrupt and threatening to democratic governance. Vicky's voice is barely a whisper. Your Honor, please. I'm not finished, Mrs. Romano. You mentioned that your husband's position affects court funding and municipal appointments. Let me tell you what affects judicial independence, the Constitution, the rule of law, and the principle that no political position grants immunity from legal accountability. Judge Caprio looks out at the packed courtroom, including several political reporters who had come to cover what they thought would be a routine traffic case. Let this be a lesson to every political family watching. Your elected office is a privilege granted by the people, not a license to threaten judges, ignore laws, or corrupt the very system that gave you power. When political families believe they're above the law, democracy itself is in danger. He looks back at Vicky, who stands with her head bowed in complete political humiliation. Mrs. Romano, I strongly recommend that you and your husband spend some time reflecting on the difference between public service and personal privilege, between political leadership and political corruption, and between representing the people and exploiting them. Judge Caprio raises his gavel. Court is adjourned. The gavel comes down with finality, but the story doesn't end there. What happened in the following hours would prove exactly why threatening judicial authority always leads to political destruction. As the courtroom emptied, Vicky stood alone at the defendant table, staring down at the citation that had just cost her $700 and potentially her husband's political career. The political privilege that had protected her for 15 years had been systematically dismantled by a 76-year-old judge who understood that democracy only works when everyone, including political families, follows the same laws. Political reporter Sarah Chen, who had witnessed the entire proceeding, approached other reporters as they prepared their stories. "I've covered Providence politics for 20 years, she told Channel 12 News. "I've never seen anything like what just happened. A sitting judge just documented a pattern of political corruption by the mayor's family in open court." As Vicky walked out of the courthouse, political news reporters who had witnessed her judicial destruction followed her with cameras. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from political advisors, campaign staff, and party officials who had watched the live stream. The video of her political humiliation would be viewed over 5 million times in the first 48 hours. Political blogs analyzed Judge Caprio's systematic exposure of Vicky's corruption as a perfect example of judicial independence checking political abuse. Law schools began using the exchange as a teaching tool about the importance of separation of powers and constitutional governance. But the real impact was felt immediately in Providence City Hall. Within hours, the Rhode Island Attorney General's office announced a formal investigation into the Romano administration. The Providence City Council called an emergency ethics hearing. 3 major local newspaper editorial boards called for Mayor Romano's resignation. By evening, Mayor Anthony Romano held a press conference. Standing beside his wife, he announced that he would not seek re-election and would cooperate fully with all investigations into his administration. "My wife's conduct in court today does not represent the values of public service or the respect for law that should characterize political leadership," he said. The Romano political dynasty, built over 15 years, collapsed in a single morning because a mayor's wife thought she could threaten a judge. 6 months later, the Attorney General's investigation concluded that the Romano administration had created a culture of political privilege and legal exemption that extended far beyond parking tickets. Mayor Romano completed his term, but was effectively a political pariah, with his party refusing to support him for any future office. Former Mayor Romano's attempt to rebuild his political career was a study in the permanent consequences of corruption. No political organization would support him due to his family's documented pattern of legal intimidation and abuse of office. Years later, political science students would study the Romano case as an example of how quickly political careers can be destroyed when families mistake elected office for legal immunity. Professor Janet Walsh at Brown University regularly tells her students, "Judge Caprio didn't end Mayor Romano's career to make a political point. He ended it to protect democracy from political families who think they're above the law." The video of that Wednesday morning became one of the most watched political accountability moments ever recorded, shared millions of times across social media platforms. Political science programs around the world used it as training material about the importance of judicial independence and the dangers of political corruption. But for those who knew Judge Caprio personally, it was simply another example of what made him special. He demonstrated something far greater than courtroom authority. He showed the power of a judge to defend our constitutional values, even when political pressure tries to crush them. He turned arrogance into accountability, not through anger, but through the steady force of justice. Judge Frank Caprio reminded us that judicial independence isn't just a line in a textbook. It is the guardrail that keeps democracy from slipping into a system where political families rule instead of serve. In an era where political corruption often hides behind influence and connections, he proved that the Constitution still has teeth, when judges refuse to bow, when courts stand firm, and when no one, not even a mayor's wife, is allowed to weaponize political power against the judiciary. Because if there is one lesson this case teaches, it's this: threatening a judge isn't just disrespectful, it is the quickest way to bring down everything a political family thinks it has built.